Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Oh my God, we have Neale Donald Walsch coming on in this hour to talk to us about his new book, God's Message to the World. But Just Energy Radio is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. It's also brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. So if there's things going on in your life, give me a call, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation in person, by phone, and even via Skype. So let me tell you a little bit about Neale and get him on the air because I think we have plenty to talk about. Neale Donald Walsch is a modern-day spiritual messenger whose words continue to touch the world in profound ways. With an early interest in religion and a deeply felt connection to spirituality, Neale spent the majority of his life thriving professionally, yet searching for spiritual meaning before experiencing his now famous Conversations with God. The Conversations with God series of books that emerged from those encounters have been translated into 37 languages, touching millions and inspiring important changes in their day-to-day lives. His website is neildonaldwalsh.com, so please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Neale Donald Walsch. Hi, Neale. How are you?
Well, I'm just wonderful. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
You know, it's been so long since you've been on the show, and I'm just very thrilled to have you on. And this new book, I loved it. Loved it. So we're just going to jump right in. Because one of the things that I love is to have people step outside the box, to look at things from a new perspective. And that's exactly, to me, what this book does. But in reading it, you seemed a little down on what we're doing here on Earth, or at least our perception that the systems that we have put into place are leading to a higher quality of life for humanity. So why so down on kind of what we're doing here?
Because what we're doing here is not working in any area of our lives. The book is called, by the way, the title of the book is God's Message to the World. You've Got Me All Wrong. And the book makes the point at the outset that the problem in the world today is that none of the systems we have put into place to create a better life for all of us on this planet have, in fact, produced that. In fact, it's worse than that. Not only have they not produced the outcome for which they were designed, they've actually produced exactly the opposite. Let me give you some examples, if I might.
Sure, go ahead.
Our political system, which we created to produce safety and security for the world's people, have produced nothing but disagreement and disarray. Our economic systems, created to produce opportunity and sufficiency for all, have produced increasing poverty and massive economic inequality, with 85 of the world's richest people holding more wealth than 3.5 billion. Let me repeat that because you might have missed it. 85 people hold more wealth than 3.5 billion put together. Our ecological systems, created to help us produce a sustainable lifestyle, have been abused so much that they're now generating environmental disasters right and left. Our educational systems, which were created to lift higher and higher the knowledge base of the planet's population, have actually produced a drop in global awareness and sensitivity that each year sinks our intellectual common denominator lower and lower. We can't even remember our own telephone numbers anymore. Our healthcare systems, which were created in hopes of producing a good and long life for an increasingly higher percentage of people, are doing little to eliminate inequality of access to modern medicines and healthcare services, thus actually providing top-level medical services to a lower and lower percentage of people every year. our social systems, which we created to produce the joy of community and harmony among a divergent population, more and more generate and encourage discordance, disparity, prejudice, and despair, to say nothing of rampant injustice. And we only need to mention two words to illustrate that: Eric Garner. And most sadly, most dysfunctional of all, our spiritual systems, created to produce a greater closeness to God and to each other, have actually produced bitter righteousness, shocking intolerance, widespread anger, deep-seated hatred, and self-justified violence. What gives here? What's going on with the human race? You ask me why I'm down on what's going on the planet. There's wonderful stuff happening, too, on the earth, but none of the systems we have put into place to create a better life has done anything near that. They've done, in fact, exactly the opposite. Nothing is working except for maybe 5% of the world's people. I'm sure you must be aware that roughly 5% of the world's people now hold or control 95% of the world's wealth and resources. That means unless we're okay, because, of course, those 5% are fine with that. They say, Neale, what's the problem? What's the problem? Just because 95% of the world's people do not control the wealth and resources of the planet? What's the trouble? Oh, wait a minute. I think I begin to understand. It turns out that 2.6 billion people, let me repeat that because you might have missed it, 2.6 billion people do not have a toilet on this planet today.
All right, I'd be kind of hurting with that one.
This in a civilization that calls itself civilized, where 1/3 of the population does not have sanitation, where 1.5 billion people do not have electricity. Did you know that 1.5 billion people, as we sit and talk today, in this year, 2014, do not have electricity? And
that's just hard to believe.
See, because, and then you ask me why I'm down. You ask me the question. That's why I laughed when you asked me the question, because clearly you don't understand. You don't understand that one out of 8 people in the world will go to bed tonight hungry. That's 1 out of every 8 people has insufficient food to eat.
Well, and I get it. And the reason why I asked the question is, your other books are very spiritually uplifting, and I started reading this book, and I'm like, boy, he's kind of pissed off. So I had to ask the question.
Yeah, I'm not pissed off. What I am is observing, and when you finish reading the book, excuse me, I'm sorry, the book is very uplifting, because the book talks about solutions, but the book also points to the problems, and the problem is our fundamental belief system about life. We can't, frankly, we just can't go on like this. If we're going to declare ourselves to be an evolved species, if we're going to declare ourselves to be a spiritual species, if we're going to declare ourselves to be a civilized civilization, then we're going to have to make some changes, it seems to me. We can't continue, living the way we're living and call it good. And by the way, that inures to our personal benefit. This is not just about changing the world or making conditions on the planet better. This is about our own individual lives, because it seems to me that it's very difficult. I would think it would be very difficult for any individual to reach and sustain a place of high individual consciousness, spiritual awareness, and spiritual peace when looking into the face of these conditions that are being experienced by 95% of the people on the planet. So it's not possible, I don't think, for us to feel, Neale, relax, everything is fine. I mean, I'm doing fine here in Terre Haute. Things are wonderful in Phoenix. There's no problem in Minneapolis. What? Neale, relax. And of course, if you're okay with that, if you're okay with 1/3 of the population needing to relieve themselves outdoors, then fine. live your life and allow yourself to imagine that all is well with the world. On the other hand, if you see that we're moving in the wrong direction on the planet, that we're moving into a place of non-sustainability, that we cannot sustain this lifestyle, then you might want to ask why. What is it that we don't understand? The understanding of which would change everything. And I believe that it is our spiritual understandings, not necessarily yours and mine specifically or individually, but those that are embraced by the largest number of people on the earth, that is, billions and billions of people who hold ideas about life and about God, specifically a whole raft of ideas about God, which drive the engine of the human experience and create these conditions I've just spoken of. That's why the book, God's Message to the World, You've Got Me All Wrong, has been written and published. Because when I asked God in my conversations with God, what is it? What is it that creates the extraordinarily dysfunctional world in which we live? God says it's really very simple. It's what you believe. It's what you believe about yourself, about life, about the world, and mostly about God. Change those beliefs, and you will finally create the world for which you say you all yearn, but for which you do very little to create it.
It seems to me that in, I'm going to say, recent years, that people are starting to lift the veil of some of the dogma that we have been enculturated with. Not necessarily in the spiritual realms, but in other areas. I mean, in spiritual realms as well. But they're starting to ask more questions. They're starting to wanting to know who's the man standing behind the curtain. And it seems like bringing God into the picture in our relationship with each other is just another aspect of that questioning.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I also agree with your observation that we're seeing larger and larger numbers of people who are going there, who are beginning to finally explore and examine the root cause of our global dysfunction, to say nothing of in some cases, our individual dysfunction. What I notice is that even among the 5% of the people who are holding 95% of the world's wealth and resources, even among that 5%, many people are simply unhappy. Remarkably, they're simply unhappy. They're leading lives of discomfort and despair and unhappiness in way, way, way too many cases. So we even find suffering and unhappiness among the extraordinarily well-to-do and even among those who are living a very comfortable and wonderful life. So we have to ask ourselves, what's going on? And I think you're right. More and more people are asking themselves that question. The inquiry, however, the key question is, are we asking ourselves that question fast enough? That is, are enough people moving in that direction so that we can actually win this human race? Or are we going to be finding ourselves in such an unsustainable situation that in another 50 years, there's not enough water to serve us all on the planet? Or
but do you think we even have 50 years? That's the question I ask myself fairly regular.
That's a very good question. I don't have any way of really estimating whether it's 30 years, 50 years, or 100 years, but it's certainly not going to be an infinite number of years. I do believe that in the lives of my grandchildren, unless we turn something around here, things could become extremely difficult and very challenging on this wonderful planet. And the sad part about it is there's no reason for that. We have, in fact, been given a wonderful planet with abundant resources and sufficient opportunities for us to create the kind of life that we really want to experience. We simply have to stop being the way we're being now, stop acting the way we're acting now, and stop believing the things that we are believing now, which is what is causing us to act the way we're acting, you see.
And you believe that it all comes down to this dogma that we have been fed from a spiritual perspective?
I don't know that it all comes down from that, but it certainly does, to a large degree, come down to what we believe about life, and those ideas emerge from what we have been told about this person that is called God. And there are a lot of people on the planet who don't even believe in God, and they don't believe in God. They've moved away, if they ever did, from their belief in God, because they don't agree with what's being said about this God in whom many others do believe. So I'm not sure that that's the whole problem, but it's a huge, huge part of the problem. And because it is, and I can tell you why it is, by the way, most of the civil laws, I'm talking about civil laws on the earth, from country to country, are based to some degree in spiritual and religious beliefs. Most of the laws of Western countries, scholars about the law understand this perfectly, emerged from canon law. That is, in the earliest days when laws were being established, whether it's in England or later on in the United States and elsewhere, those laws were based largely on canon law. That is, the law of the Christian Catholic Church. And even to this day, in many countries, the law of the land is based on some scriptural or spiritual religious passage, like the Sharia, which of course is the basis of much of the civil laws of many of the countries where Islam is the predominant religion. So we don't have to look very far to see what is informing our civil laws, and those civil laws are directed toward the behaviors of individuals and corporations and politicians and the whole mechanistic structure of society from A to Z. Just to give you a simple example, there are actually laws in the United States and elsewhere in the world, by the way, that say it is criminal, it is against the law to marry a person of the same gender. Now, there is no reason in civil law for that to become an actual legal question. There's no civil reason, no reason in civil law. The only reason is that people believe that God says it's not okay. And so because billions of people, not a couple 100,000, but billions of people believe that it is against God's law to fall in love with and choose to spend your life with a person of the same gender, because it is presumably against God's law, we have made it against our law as well. That's just one of many, many examples. When I was a child in parochial school, they tied the hands of children, they tied the arms of children behind their backs with a towel if they were left-handed, because they said that left-handedness was a sign of the devil. I'm not making this up. This was in my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
In my childhood, a black man could not marry a white woman because interracial marriage was considered to be, follow my reasoning now, against the law of God. And because it was against the law of God, we decided we should make it against the law of human beings as well. The Mormon Church, until relatively recently, until about only 35 years ago, refused to allow a black man to become a priest in the Mormon Church because of the color of his skin. Because the Mormon Church believed, until a new revelation came to the leaders 30 years ago, the Mormon Church believed that persons with black skin carried, here we go again, the curse of Satan. This was a church saying this. Yeah, I could go on forever about how human beings have treated each other based on their understanding of how God is treating us. And then one day we woke up and said, you know what? What if God didn't have any of those preferences? What if God never even dreamt of, never even thought of an idea that because of the color of your skin, you shouldn't be a member of the clergy, to say nothing about your anatomical characteristics, because women still can't become members of the clergy in certain faiths because they don't have particular apertures. What in the world? What in the world have we done to ourselves, saying that this is God's preference and these are God's laws? So what we're calling for now is a brand new look at the possibility that it could be true. God's message to the world: you've got me all wrong. Guys, you're making it all up to suit your own personal predilections, having nothing to do with what God serves us with in terms of her desires, or what God gives us, or what God asks for or demands from us. So I've written a book that contains 17 statements that human beings believe are true about God, none of which are true. And on the back of the book, I actually printed those statements as a true or false quiz. True or false, God is to be feared. Well, 3.5 billion people in the world would say, of course, we should be God-fearing people. True or false, God demands obedience. Well, several billion people on the planet would say, of course God demands obedience. You don't obey God, you're in big trouble. True or false, God requires us to believe in God and to worship God in a specific way. That is, you must belong to a particular faith tradition or a particular religion. Otherwise, you're going straight to hell. True or false, God is vengeful and God's love can turn to wrath. And the list goes on. The book contains 17 such statements. Belief systems like God has a plan for us. Or God is on our side. And that allows us to lop off people's heads and broadcast it on television because God is on our side. Or God honors self-sacrifice and long-suffering and martyrdom. Or ideas like God sometimes answers our prayers and sometimes does not. God will reward us or punish us on Judgment Day. And the last two really, really powerful misbeliefs, misunderstandings. God wants us to return to heaven. And the biggest misunderstanding of all, God is separate from us. He's over there, and we're over here, and never the twain shall meet, except, of course, on Judgment Day, when those of us who have been naughty boys and girls will go straight to hell, a place of everlasting damnation, not even, equal to the sins we've committed, but everlasting damnation. And by the way, just in case you've missed a point, you're going to experience everlasting damnation, the fires and the torment of everlasting suffering in hell, even if you have been compassionate, kind, caring, loving, generous, peaceful, and patient as a person on earth. Doesn't matter. See, because you chose the wrong religion. So if you belong to the wrong faith, God says, I really don't care how you acted while you were alive. That doesn't matter to me. You didn't belong to the right religion, so you're going to suffer in the everlasting fires of hell. Unbelievable torment forever and ever and even forevermore. You were a nice person. Everyone who knew you said you were an incredibly wonderful human being. But see, we don't care about that up here. We only care that it's a name brand religion. You got to belong to the right religion or you're out.
Growing up, I went to Catholic school, and they told us that if you weren't baptized, that you went to limbo. So that created some big issues for me because my dad's Jewish. And so, I was like, can't you take it back? Can't you take the baptism back? Because it really upset me that when I died, I would never see my dad. I'd never see my grandmother. I would never see my grandfather again. And it started the schism within myself of separation from the Catholic Church in second grade. Just because of the stuff they say.
Fortunately, we're seeing some changes. Even the Catholic Church has announced that there's no such thing as limbo. The Pope said a couple of years ago, you know what, we made a mistake. He made an official declaration and said, there is no such place as limbo, and the teaching of limbo was just simply an error. Granted, we made the error for several hundred years, but in fact, thinking about it more closely, we see that there's no such place as limbo. Pope John Paul II said something even more extraordinary in 1999. He in an encyclical before an audience of several hundred people in Rome, he said there's no such place as hell. Hell doesn't exist as a place of torment or eternal damnation. And furthermore, he said, it's not God's job to send us to hell. Hell is an experience, not a place, and it's the experience of separation that we voluntarily enter into. We separate ourselves from God, and there's nothing more hell-like, nothing more hellish than to be separated from God, but it's a voluntary choice that we make, and we can undo it. We can unchoose it. We can decide that we're going to actually, in fact, not separate ourselves from God. So this is the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church saying this.
I'm impressed. I'm really impressed.
So, and of course, as I mentioned a couple of years ago, relatively speaking, 30 years ago or so, in the 70s, the Mormon Church decided that it was okay for black men to become priests. It was worse than that, actually, in the Mormon Church. Not only could black men not become priests, black women, men or women, could not even attend temple. They were not, get this, not allowed into the house of the Lord. But about 30 years ago, the leadership of the church said, okay, fair enough, we made a mistake. And although they didn't say that, they said that they had received, in the words of the church leaders, a new revelation. They had received a new revelation. Those were the words that the leaders of the church used. And because of that new revelation, they rescinded their orders. They rescinded their idea that they held from the beginning of the church, and they then allowed black people to come to temple and black men to become priests. Wow, what an enlightened point of view. It took them only until 1976 to get to that place. So you see how slow and how incredibly slow our progress has been. But it's now speeding up. We are increasing in our level of awareness, and we're saying to each other, okay, obviously, some of these beliefs are, may I use the word, ridiculous. And so we are now going to decide, what if it were true that many of the things we believe about God is to be feared. God's forgiveness is required for us to get into heaven. God was at war with the devil, and that's how this all began.
Well, and let me interject something here. I mean, your focus has been on more contemporary religions and the belief systems, but much of the stuff that you cover, which is the part that I was like, sweet about this book, are belief systems that go back so far into antiquity, long before the Jews, long before the Catholics, that really kind of create the foundation of our civilization. And the question I always ask myself when I start stepping outside that box, that little heretical box, is, well, who made up these rules in the first place? Whose guidelines are we following? Because if they're not God's, they're somebody's. And this is, some of them are universal. They are found in every culture on the planet.
I think that the challenge that we are facing is that we are a very young species, number one. Let me comment on that at two levels. First of all, the age of our species itself. It's not widely understood. It's not widely known or comprehended deeply that we are a very, very young species in this universe. First of all, of course, there are many more species of sentient beings in this universe than human beings. We know that. I mean, any thinking person understands that. There are billions and billions of stars around which revolve trillions of planets. Surely there's at least one other one, and of course there are many more, where life forms have been able to exist, and those life forms have created actual civilizations. That is, civilizations that are civilized, as opposed to our uncivilized civilization. Our civilization is so uncivil that we actually kill people by the government. The governments in countries kill people in order to tell people that it's wrong to kill people. We call that the death penalty. And so in states like Texas, they actually brag about the fact that last year they put to death over 550 people, put to death by the state to teach us that killing people is not okay. completely ignoring Einstein's marvelous insight that you cannot solve any problem using the same energy that created it. You're not going to end violence with violence. You're not going to end anger with anger. And so, but we're a very young species. So here's how young we are, just so people can understand the nature of the problem. If you take the age of the Earth and put it on the scale of 1 year, just for purposes of scale, so we can really bring it within our ability to understand. Let's pretend that the entire age of the Earth has been overlaid on a calendar year. If that's true, the first single-cell forms of life on the Earth didn't appear until the end of March. Dinosaurs didn't appear on this planet until December the 7th. Humanoids, that is, mammals who walked upright on two legs, did not appear until around the 24th or 25th of December. And the entirety of human history, that is, everything we've recorded in human history, has taken place in the last 60 seconds of the year. That's how young we are as a species relative to the age of just this planet. Forget about the age of the universe. So we can see then that we are a very, very primitive, immature species in the very earliest stages of our birth into the cosmic community of sentient beings. So that's condition number one I wanted to discuss in terms of where did all these ideas come from. These are the ideas of children who simply don't understand, who simply really believe in a deity. We'll give them credit for that. At least they do believe there is a deity. At least they do believe there's something larger than us. Fair enough. But a very immature belief that says, it's the God of the brand name. You either belong to this religion or you're going to hell for the rest of all eternity, because I only accept people who have the right membership card. And that is, of course, an extraordinarily immature, primitive thought of a child. Now, where do these thoughts come from? Where did the original thought come from? And what is the original, if there was an original mistake, what was the original mistake? The original mistake came in the earliest days of our awakening as a species of sentient beings. When we first began to put two and two together, even at the most primitive level, and began to come to understand some things about life. Picture the caveman looking into a pool of water, and he sees his reflection. And at some point in time, it occurred to him that the person in the water was doing the same thing he was doing. He'd scratch his head, the person in the water would scratch his head. He'd tug on his ear, the person in the water would tug on his ear. And he finally got, oh my gosh, that's me. And so the concept of self-awareness came upon us as a species of sentient beings. We saw ourselves and we began to recognize ourselves as different from and other than everybody else. Now we're all seated around the campfire here in the caveman days. We're all seated around the campfire, and we're eating whatever we managed to capture that day, and we're having a fairly good time. And suddenly, the rains come. Suddenly, thunder and lightning, and there's a crack of thunder that cracks the air, and we're all wondering where that came from. So the head of the clan, who was always the biggest, brutest, strongest one, the most angry one, and we all had to kowtow to him and give him whatever he wanted. As long as we could give him what he wanted and what pleasured him, he would be reasonably okay with life. But if you got him upset, he'd be very, very angry and start punishing people, actually killing people. So we had to take very good care of the biggest, strongest guy, in the clan. He turned around and said, "Who did that? I demand to know." He just in his own grunting way. And nobody around the campfire would admit that they caused the thunder and the lightning. And then so that he sent his scouts out to other clans around, and finally they realized, none of us have created that incredibly scary experience, that crack of thunder and that lightning that started the forest fire. None of us did that. And that's when the idea of something else dawned upon the just emerging human mind. There must be something else. If none of us did that, then there's something else that's more powerful than we are. And so the nature gods, the so-called nature gods, what became the nature gods, the idea of that was developed in the primitive mind of man. God of the harvest, God of the rain, God of this and God of that, and the evil spirits as well that caused the thunder and the lightning and the forest fires and the earthquakes and all the other activities of nature that were not so welcome. And so we began to think of us down here and something else over there. And so we began to have this idea that if we could just appease, if we could just treat this other thing that was clearly more powerful than us, we had no control over it, but if we could appease it, even as we appease the head of our clan, by treating him with whatever pleasured him, if we could figure out what pleasures this other huge, huge thing that's out there, then maybe we can get it to do what we want it to do, or at least not do so much of what we don't want it to do. And then along came a drought, and it was a long drought, many, many months, and the food was drying up, and the clan was in desperate trouble, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to get this other thing that was so much larger than it to bring the rains, somehow to do something, make it happy. What do we have to do to make this thing happy? So they threw a little campfire party, a little campfire celebration, as they used to do for the head of the clan. They treated him the same way. So how do we treat this brute in the sky? And what do we do? So this, one person got up and did a little dance, and he reached over to one of the branches of the tree, which was dying for lack of water, and of course it was dry, and so he snapped off a branch and he started shaking it just to do a little dance with it, and it made a little noise because the leaves were all very dry, so he made a little rattling sound. He did the dance, and as luck would have it, as it would happen, the rains came in that moment, and everyone turned to the rainmaker, which is what he soon became called. He became the second most powerful person in the clan, the head of the clan, and then the rainmaker. He became the chief priest, if you will, of the clan. And whenever they wanted more rain to come, they asked him to do his little rain dance. And metaphysics being what it is, if you believe that something will occur, it will occur, whether you're primitive or not, because metaphysics is metaphysics. So, as it turned out, 3 times out of 4 when he did his dance, darn if it didn't rain. Thus was born religion. Do this, and you get that. Be good little boys and girls, and you'll get rewarded. But it was a religion based on separation. It was a separation theology that said God is over here, and we're over there, and never the twain shall meet. And that wouldn't be so bad if the separation theology began and ended there, my dear, but it doesn't. A separation theology creates a separation cosmology. That is a cosmological way of looking at life, whether you believe in God or not, that says that everything is separate from everything else. And a separation cosmology creates a separation psychology, individual psychological profiles that allow us to feel totally alone and lonely in a crowd, in a planet that's overcrowded, and yet we feel still totally alone. And a separation psychology produces a separation sociology. That is, entire societies that imagine that they're separate from each other, and by the way, better than each other. And a separation sociology produces a separation pathology, pathological behaviors of self-destruction, evident from the beginning of human history. So we see then that a separation theology creates a separation cosmology, which creates a separation psychology, which creates a separation sociology, which creates a separation pathology. Oh, my goodness. We have a problem. Houston, we have a problem, because we think that we're separate from each other, and we think that we're separate from God. And we are neither. And so the belief in separation is where it all began. I'm sorry to give you a 14-minute answer to your 1-minute question, but it was not a small question.
I like big questions. When, you bring up the point about people that contend that God doesn't exist, then there's the whole group that believe that God is some, and I try to find a politically correct way of saying this, and so this is my more politically correct way, an older gentleman with a white beard. When you think of God and our relationship with God and our experience here on earth, what is your vision of God?
It's not my vision of God. It's not my vision of God. It's God's revelation to humanity. Okay. And God has made it very clear in revelation after revelation, through century after century, and in more recent times, in contemporary revelations as well. By the way, God does reveal itself even in contemporary times. God hasn't stopped talking to humanity as as we observe in the change of heart of, like, for instance, the Pope, who said, what he said about limbo doesn't exist. A revelation. Like the leaders of the Mormon Church, it's okay for black men to become priests. A revelation. So revelations occur in human history right up to the present time. So the answer to your question is not what I think that God is or what I think our relationship is to God, but what God has revealed to us through us, and that is this. God obviously is not an older gentleman with a white beard and a long white robe sitting someplace on a throne in the sky, nor does God have any gender in particular, one gender or the other. God is the essential essence, the prime force, the ultimate source of wisdom and intelligence, awareness and consciousness. God is an energy, if you please, that can take any form it wishes to take and will take any form that it seeks to take as a means of revealing itself to its own creations. So God will appear in one form or another, in whatever form it feels that the creations that it has produced can understand at that point, at that level in their evolutionary progress. But God is essentially a foundational energy. If I could put it this way, the stem cell of the universe. We've discovered just in the recent times a thing called a stem cell. And we noticed then that all the cells of the body emerged at one point in time from a single stem cell, and the stem cell is the undifferentiated cellular structure of the human body. And now they've taken stem cells and they can coax those cells in a laboratory to regenerate themselves in the form of brain cells, heart cells, lung cells, or the cells of any tissue in the body. This is called biomedicine now. In the next 35 or 40 years, talk about the future, we're going to be able to actually recreate these stem cells and inject them into the heart or the lung or any area of the body that has been diseased, and give it healthy new cells and regenerate themselves to the point where our lifespans will increase by many, 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 many years. In fact, sooner or later, if we don't kill ourselves in other ways, if we don't just completely destroy the planet, the human species will have the option of dying when it chooses to, and not when it feels it has to because of dis-ease. But that's another whole topic. So but imagine that God would be, to use our imagination, the stem cell of the universe. That is the undifferentiated expression, the undifferentiated singular energy of life that then differentiates itself quite consciously and with full awareness to become everything we see in physicality. Every planet, every sun, every person, every being, every expression of divinity through physicality. So then we see that what is God is better answered by asking the question, what is God not? And the answer to that question is nothing. There is nothing that God is not. Or to put it now in the reverse, God is all there is, all there ever was, all there is now, and all there ever will be. Or, as the Catholic Church has it, and by the way, churches are not totally and completely wrong. I'm not standing here saying for 1 minute that organized religions don't have anything right. They do, in fact, have a great deal of it right. They simply are incomplete. But I love the Catholic Church's statement on this particular aspect of who and what God is. The essential energy, the prime force, the stem cell of the universe, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Now, don't forget the amen. You're talking about people receiving revelations from God, which I do believe firmly. But it seems like, you were talking about like Sharia law, which it was divinely given. And we look at some of these other cultures, especially ones we're having conflict with. It seems like the revelations that they're receiving are not congruent with the ones that we have or we're receiving. Or do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, like the 300 years of the Christian, spell that Christian, Christian crusades. 300 years, directed by the Pope, who sent the Crusaders out and said, you will tell people they have the option of either confessing in Christ or being killed on the spot. Read that, on the spot. And this went on for 300 years. creating an understandable tradition of hatred, angst, and anxiety among other peoples of the earth, not the least of whom belong to the Islamic religion, who say that, you know what, you started it. However, even they didn't start it. So it's not a question of who's at fault. I just want to be real clear here. This is not about just people who believe in one particular way, and we're going to suddenly make those guys the bad guys. There are enough people of other faiths as well who've committed the exact same, I'm going to use the word offense, against humanity. And it's going on today. It's going on even today. So, yes, there are belief systems, both Christian and Islamic and others, for that matter, that violate what we understand to be our intuitive sense, our deep-seated cellular understanding of who we really are. I'm not even going to say of what's right and wrong, because right and wrong are a movable feast, but of who we really are and what it really means to be and to express and to experience divinity flowing in us, through us, and as us. And clearly it can't be divine to kill people because they disagree with us, or to use violence as a means of advancing a particular spiritual concept or philosophy. So, yes, there is a divergence because of our youth, because we simply don't understand fundamental basics of what is really true in the universe. We still believe in a separation theology. We still believe in a God who is vengeful and wrathful and violent. And we allow our idea of a punishing, violent, a condemning God, we allow our ideas of that kind of God to form and to give us the moral authority for us to form our concepts of right and wrong and our behaviors. Getting back to the wonderful state of Texas, where they kill 550 people a year in the death penalty, and when you say, well, how can a civilized society do that? I mean, how can a group of sentient beings who imagine themselves to be civilized kill people deliberately as a means of saying that killing people deliberately isn't okay? And they answer, well, the scriptures have it, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's simple justice.
You just obviously haven't really spent much time in Texas. I live in Texas, so just making a comment. Anyway, move along. Actually, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to give you an opportunity to kind of bring this full circle with the little bit of time we have left.
Sure. I just wanted to, the last comment I was going to make is our ideas of justice are based on what we imagine God's ideas of justice to be. That's the point I was making. And as long as we imagine that God lives within a system of justice where things are right and things are wrong, and if you do the wrong thing, you're punished, and we imagine that God has a need, somehow ego need to do that, or some other need to do that, that God has somehow a need to send you to hell because you simply confessed in the wrong religion. As long as we hold that belief, we're going to use that idea of a punishing, violent, vindictive, angry God as our moral authority for us to be violent, punishing, vindictive, and angry as well. So we remove the first belief, and the second behaviors begin to dissolve.
Well, and that leads us into this question. What do you think the world would be like if we let go of this long-term negative programming that we have found ourselves stuck in?
We would have the 1,000 years of peace and more that has long been predicted for the human race. What would happen is, obviously, first of all, violence would disappear from the face of the earth. We could no longer be violent with each other because we have now embraced a notion that we are all one. That what I do for you, I do for me. This goes way past, by the way, you are your brother's keeper. This is not a fancy version of you're your brother's keeper. I am not my brother's keeper. I am my brother. That is, there's no difference except in differentiation between him and me, any more than my fingers are not part of my own body. See, I got 5 fingers as I look at my hand, and each finger looks different and performs a different function, but it is still attached to and part of the hand, which is attached to and part of my body. In that way are we connected to each other as well, appearing to be different and functioning, in fact, in different ways, but no less part of the singular body of life itself that we call, in my vernacular, God. If we begin to embrace that notion, all of the behaviors that we would never, ever perform, never, ever behave that way with people, with ourselves, we would in fact treat ourselves differently as well. We would treat ourselves far better than we do now, and we would treat others as we treat ourselves. What's interesting is that the teachers of all the world's great religions, doesn't matter which one you choose, they've all articulated in one way or another the same bottom line truth. The answer out of this maze, the way to get out of this incredible dilemma, is really quite simple. You can put it in one sentence, actually. Do unto others as you would have it done unto you. Because what you do unto others is being done unto you, in case we haven't noticed. And the reason that what you do unto others is being done unto you is because there's only one of us. We are a single being demonstrating and expressing as individuations of the self-same single being. So what would happen if the earth chose finally to let go of its idea of separation and to notice that we all are fingers on the same hand and we all are hands of the same being called God? What would happen is all of the laws, the customs, and the behaviors that could only emerge from a society that imagines itself to be separate from each other would disappear virtually overnight. We would never treat another person unfairly, to say nothing of cruelly, to say nothing of violently. We would find a way to make sure that we all understood that there's enough. We would never allow 653 children to die on this planet every hour. I said every hour of starvation, while we throw away more food in the restaurants of New York City on any given night than it would take to feed them for a week.
Oh, don't even get me started on that. I can't believe that there are places that will throw the food away and not give it to a shelter or let people have it. And I find it appalling.
See, because there are health laws, my dear, and if somebody got sick off of eating someone else's leftovers, they would then be able to sue the restaurant. So we have to protect the owners of the restaurant and make sure that nobody loses any money in a lawsuit like that. I know. I was homeless. I was homeless for a year. I walked the streets for a year. I understand what it's like to be on the sidewalk for a year of your life, looking for your next meal, trying to figure out where it could come from. And we had, thank goodness, we had a kitchen worker at one of the local restaurants where I lived who understood exactly what you're saying, and he would sneak the food out, the leftover food that people didn't eat. He would just sneak it out to the back door to the homeless, and I was one of them, and feed us and say, not a word, guys, not a word. And if you do get a stomach ache or you do happen to become ill over this, for heaven's sake, just not a word. Don't tell anybody I'm doing this. But we all lined up from 10 o'clock till 11 o'clock at night behind that guy's restaurant, and out he came with the dishes of the stuff. Because, when we understand that we are all one, we would never allow 650 children to die every single 60 minutes on this planet for insufficient food, to talk about just one of the many conditions that would no longer exist on the planet. We would, in fact, create the paradise of which we are capable once we understand fully who we are. That's why I invite people to read the book, God's Message to the World, You've Got Me All Wrong. And by the way, you can read 5 chapters of it for free. I've got it on the internet, a 5-chapter sample of the book. You can get it at godsmessagetotheworld.info.
godsmessagetotheworld.info. I think people don't understand, like in a marriage or in a family, everyone that works, that works in the dynamics, that everyone chips in and does things to benefit the relationship or benefit the family so that they all can grow, versus, well, this is your thing and this is my thing, and keeping it all separate. And those are the families that fall apart.
If we understood that the whole human family was one family, even as we understand that in our own lives, most of us do, everything would change overnight. If you're having a big holiday meal and Uncle Jim shows up at the front door, he's been gone to New Zealand for 10 years on his own adventure. He came back and realized, oh, this is the day that they have their annual feast. And he comes to the front door, Uncle Jim, we haven't seen you in 5 years. How have you been? I'm wonderful. May I come in to eat? No, sorry. You got to stay out there. Maybe we'll throw some scraps at you. Of course not. We let him in immediately because he's long lost Uncle Jim, of course. And nobody says, we didn't prepare enough. We simply share enough in a way that allows Uncle Jim to sit down with us. There's always enough. Always enough. We simply each find a way to share. Now, when we decide that the entire world is Uncle Jim, that there's nobody who's not Uncle Jim, that we all belong to the same family, then we show up at the same table and we say, you know what? There's enough.
Always. And on that note, Neale, we need to call it an episode. Thank you so much. I loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here with you. Thanks for asking.
Oh, thanks for coming on. So it's Neale Donald Walsch. His book is Messages, God's Message to the World. Got me all wrong. And next week, we will be talking with Susan Shumsky about the power of the chakras. And so until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember, it's all just energy.